Yidhari, our first Ice Rapture agent and an Octopus Lyran, will be arriving soon. Granted, she only has 4 tails, but with 2 arms and 2 legs, that does add up to 8 total, so all's good. She's actually been playable for a while now, being a trial character usable in Threshold Simulation, although the reasonings for putting her up against Miasma Priest, who has 40% ice resistance, do elude me. It might just be because, when fighting the right enemies, Yidhari's performance is shockingly good. Against the new 2.3 boss, Wandering Hunter, I was able to get consistent kills with her, meaning not just once or twice, but multiple times. Better yet, she harkens back to another ice damage dealer in her team compositions, where I found that her best lineup wasn't one with all limited S-rank agents, but one that made use of Lycaon with an A-rank weapon. Not like she doesn't do well when run with other units though, as Trigger, Fufu, and Koleda are all fine alternatives. It's just that when an M0 standard banner unit ends up outperforming everyone else without needing to rely on signature vengeance, is there really a need to use others? For this video at least, we'll go through them all, alongside a short breakdown on how Wandering Hunter works in Deadly Assault and how I routed the fight to get kills. But before that, let's have a very brief overview of Yidhari and how she works. Being a Rapture agent means that she uses Sheer Force, scaling predominantly off HP instead of attack, and pierces all enemy defense with her elemental damage. There's a few unique aspects to her though, namely that she consumes HP to charge her attacks, said consumed HP generates decibels, with ultimate use being tied to a buff, wants to actively stay at low HP to deal damage, and can counter enemies with her skills for bonuses. Let's go through these one by one, starting with her charge. You find a meter under Yidhari's portrait in combat, and that tracks her current charge level. There's 3 total. Level 1, which is when the bar is below half, level 2, when it's over half, and level 3, when it's maxed out. Holding basic attack will have Yidhari bring her hammer back and begin to consume HP and increase her charge meter. The higher her current HP, the faster it's consumed, up until 25% HP, after which it will not reduce it any further. No worries though, as the charge is independent of how much of her HP is used up and will always build up, no matter what. Her entire playstyle revolves around this charge, but having to constantly look up at the bar every 3 seconds can be a little disorienting, so rather than relying on it as a measure of her charge level, there's visual indicators on Yidhari herself, with her hammer glowing and her stance changing after every level. Releasing the basic attack button will send Yidhari into Frostbite Embrace, which we'll call Charged Basic Attack for ease of understanding. This begins with a long spin and ends with a powerful slam finisher. If basic attack is pressed again before the spin ends, she'll shortcut straight into the slam finisher. After this finisher, Yidhari can then link straight into the third and final hit of her regular basic attack, Crushing Strike. This is important because this attack heals 10% of her max HP, and if used after the charged basic attack, will deal up to 30% more damage, scaling with the charge level. In practice, you won't want to spin. It's handy at gathering up mobs like in Shield Defense, as it has a massive vacuum effect, but other than that, its damage modifiers are very poor for the time it takes. A simple training dummy comparison where one rotation spins in full and another immediately shortcuts to the finisher makes this evident, not just in terms of damage, but resource generation too. These resources, like decibels, do matter a fair bit because, and I quote, Yidhari gains fewer decibels from landing skills. Instead, she gains decibels as her HP decreases, with every 1% HP lost granting 10 decibels. So getting as many basic 3 shortcuts for healing and then looping charges for HP consumption is ideal. There are caveats to this generation though, like how fewer decibels isn't really a multiplier change, or how her teammates don't get half of her decibels from HP consumption like with regular skills, but we can go through this in more detail on the full guide later. What you need to know is that decibels function differently for Yidhari than other characters. Even if she has 3000 decibels, she does not gain access to her ultimate. It's only by landing the final hit of her charged basic attack, either of her EX specials, or her chain attack, that she consumes these decibels and activates Ether Veil Wellspring for 30 seconds. While Ether Veil Wellspring is active, Yidhari's skills are enhanced. Her chain attack, for example, will be replaced with an alternate version that does more damage. And every 12 seconds, hitting enemies with her level 3 charged basic attack or her enhanced EX special will summon Icy Tentacles, doing extra damage and counting as EX special attacks, making it for easy Yunkui Tails upkeep. And she builds her charged basic attack faster than before. More than just Ether Veil, Yidhari will also gain a separate buff, which has the sole purpose of tracking how long she has to use her ultimate. After consuming her decibels, Yidhari is good to build more without overcapping while retaining access to her ultimate. If you don't use her ultimate within 30 seconds though, it's gone for good. And since it's tied to a buff, if you somehow get enough decibel generation to build 3000 decibels again before the 30-second timer has expired, you don't get 2 ultimates. You just refresh the buff, overriding the first ultimate and losing it instead. These factors are very important when routing fights with her and does inform her team building, with it meaning that certain characters are far less effective than they otherwise would be. The HP consumption is not used only for decibels though, it's used for Yidhari's own self buffs, as she gets up to 100% in damage bonus the lower her HP is, maxing out at 50% HP and under. If at the maximum bonus, it will still linger for 5 seconds even if her HP goes up past 50%. But this isn't the case for bonuses provided by her signature engine. Again, something we can cover in more detail on the full guide. Just know that Yidhari wants to keep healing herself and consuming set HP for decibels, but never staying above 50% for very long, if at all. Healing is not just done via her basic 3 though, it's also done via her EX special, and the way it all functions is quite interesting. Yidhari's regular special, Cease Thoughts, has terrible range, terrible damage, and is rarely worth using. Her regular EX special, Frost Coil, isn't all that good either. Well, it's not good, but it's very weak in comparison to her enhanced EX special, Glacial Crush. When Yidhari is charging or spinning as part of her charged basic attack, pressing special will cast Surging Code Crushing Pursuit. She can also get this by pressing dodge while holding down basic attack. It's a long name, but in actuality it has 3 branching paths. Surging Code, Crushing Pursuit, so both names together, which is a default version. Surging Code, only the first name, which is a variant triggered when using the skill as a counter. And Crushing Pursuit, only the second name, which is a variant triggered when using the skill with over 60 adrenaline on a stunned enemy. The skill itself is rather weak, but pressing basic after will shortcut to the finishing slam of her charged basic attack, and as mentioned before, that goes straight into basic 3. When either of the alternate versions are triggered, it will immediately max out her charge level, all of which carries over to the charged basic and the basic 3. In practice, this isn't all that big a deal. Yidhari also gains charge levels when being hit during a charge, and the special is quite slow while doing very little damage, so depending on where you are with a charge, it's better to just build it manually. What's big about this is, if Yidhari has enough adrenaline after either variant, pressing basic or special will go into her enhanced EX special, Glacial Crush instead. Its stats are frankly ridiculous. Her regular EX special, just over 1000% in damage multiplier. Her enhanced EX special, over 2000% damage multiplier, and that's on a Rapture agent. It also has a days build value of over 1000%. If used after the counter variant, it refunds 15 adrenaline. So out of stun it has an effective cost of 45 adrenaline, not 60. Better yet, it links straight into the charged basic attack finisher afterwards, with it inheriting the maxed out charge level you have before going into the enhanced EX special. These distinctions, or branching paths, are important to be mindful of. Yidhari will not refund adrenaline when used after the stun hit variant. And don't forget it's not just using it in stun, but using it in stun when at over 60 adrenaline. Yidhari also cannot go into the enhanced EX special at all if it isn't after one of the variants, no matter the charge level. Thankfully its signings are not too strict, as even if done shortly after Yidhari has been hit, the counter variant still works fine. There's a lot more to her, be it around the little intricacies of how charge level boosts work, dodge lockouts, and even issues and bugs like spontaneous teleporting, but we can go through them in the full guide. With the fundamentals of Yidhari's kit in mind, tailoring a combo route for her is quite simple. Let's have a look at one in full. To go through it verbally, it's Chain Attack, Enhance the EX Special, Chain Attack, Ultimate, Enhance the EX Special, then Charge Basic into Basic 3. It doesn't need to be in this order, but it does help a lot if it is. Since Yidhari uses 2 chain attacks and her Enhance the EX Special takes a while, you will want to swap to another character during them to trigger chains. And this is a great opportunity to use EX Specials on stunners for King of the Summit or Refresh Dream State on Lucia. Hitting stunned enemies with her alternate special always leads to an instant maxing out of her charge level, and as her enhanced EX special can shortcut into a charge basic and then a basic 3, it's a nice boost to fit in. So it's better not to use 2 enhanced EX specials back to back before ultimates or chains, and leave one for the end. Even without the charge basic transition, you will want to avoid doing multiple in a row because of how much they heal Yidhari, which can leave her at over 50% HP. So while the structure is flexible, doing as instructed here will lead to the best results. You also want to use the most damaging skills, namely ultimate, well before the end of stun, because Wandering Hunter is very unforgiving when it comes to its stage mechanic buff. It will frequently fall off before a stun ends and severely tank the damage of any skill that doesn't land while it's up. So let's briefly go through what it does and how the boss works in general. First things first, it has a lot of defense. The details tab will say it's got 40% higher base defense while in Miasma Field, but that's not all. he already has more than 66% higher base defense than other bosses, and then that gets increased by a further 40% when Miasma Shield is up. In fact, its defense is boosted by a total of 140% when it has Miasma Shield. This doesn't matter for Yidhari, but it means that non-Rapture agents are heavily gimped. Hugo, for example, does more damage on Miasmic Fiend than on Wandering Hunter, despite Wandering Hunter having Ice weakness. Next is how its Miasma Shield and performance points work. When the timer reaches 2 minutes, the boss will cue their next action to be the activation of the Miasma Shield. As soon as the skill animation begins to play, the boss cannot be interrupted and is locked out of being stunned, even without the shield having gone up. This will then start a hide and seek phase. 3 children will be placed around the arena, and using the perception technique from Aerospace City, you have to find and select the real little Lucia. Figuring out which is the right one is rather easy, as there'll be an aura around her that isn't present on the 2 fakes. Take too long or pick the wrong one and it might as well be game over, with Wandering Hunter coming in for an unparable attack. Pick the right one and he'll instead charge in for a parable attack. Successfully countering it will shed a chunk of miasma to shorten the phase. Performance points are all gained in this short interaction. Picking the right Lucia gives 3000 and parrying the attack gives 2000. The description says it can be a defensive or evasive assist, but this is either bugged or an outright lie. Not having a character that can defensive assist leads to no yellow flash and no counter option is available. To be fair, even with defensive assists, Wandering Hunter can often just miss. So try to move as little as possible between selecting little Lucia and parrying to minimize the chances of this happening. There's plenty of other bugs too. Certain moves alter the boss's hurt box in such a way that characters don't aim at the boss, but aim at his detached arm, causing attacks to miss completely. No matter the character, even those with wide hitboxes on their dodge counters will miss. There's nothing you can do about appearing 2 miles away from the boss. And Wandering Hunter will randomly just wait around and do nothing. It can be anywhere from 1 to 5 seconds without a single action being queued. And if this happens at a bad time, it can single-handedly end the run. This is because it all ties into the core of this fight, the wavering stage buff. Whenever an assist follow-up or dodge counter hits an enemy, 1 stack of wavering is applied, stacking 5 times and lasting 15 seconds. Repeated triggers refresh the duration of all stacks. It buffs the sheer damage value of all attacks hitting Wandering Hunter by 7% per stack, for a maximum of 35% sheer damage bonus. This is a gigantic buff. A sheer damage bonus is a separate multiplier from damage bonus or sheer force, so it sees very little dilution. It also means that it scales in full with combat HP percent bonuses, like Aetherveil Wellspring and Dreamlit Hearth, as well as flat sheer bonuses, like Darkbreaker. Keeping it up on the out-of-stun period is rarely an issue, but unless you're playing Manitou, it isn't possible to refresh it mid-stun. As it only lasts 15 seconds, that just about covers a full stun period after factoring in stun recalc pauses. The problem is that the stacks build only with the first hit of an attack. Trigger, for example, has such a long assist follow-up that even if it's used to open a stun, the buff will run out before Yidhari can land all hits of her combo. Unlike Miasma Priest or the Defiler, this fight isn't too reliant on getting specific attack patterns, but it is reliant on getting attacks period. I've lost too many runs because the boss just refused to attack for such a long time that it meant I couldn't get 4 full stuns. Or I ended up stunning the boss without refreshing the buff, lacking the damage to make it to a kill. Although admittedly, you won't need maximum stacks in every stun for a kill. Let's have a look at how an M0P1 Yidhari with 35 substats can get a full 65,000 score on Wandering Hunter. There's some specific routing that I use for this fight, so in broad strokes, let's go through the important bits first. The key to this fight is meeting specific days thresholds to just about make 4 full stuns, which can be pretty darn difficult. For every stun, as many stacks of wavering should be built, with the final stack being built as late as possible so that it doesn't run out mid-combo. We also want Yidhari to have all the necessary resources to do her burst in full. It is entirely possible to stun Wandering Hunter before his miasma shield goes up. This is not too hard to do for most Yidhari teams, and with good luck, it's possible to build up a lot of wavering stacks before the stun begins. The problem is that getting the stun and wavering stacks in time is very inconsistent, relying on both a fast first stun and getting the right attack patterns, namely a specific triple parable string that only uses up 1 assist point per parry. Even if you do manage to get that early stun, Yidhari just won't have had the time to build up resources. If you've managed things well, maybe you go into it with enough decibels, but certainly not enough adrenaline to get 2 enhanced DX specials in the combo. So while it can make days management a hell of a lot easier, it's a trap to go for it. Even if you manage the miasma skip, or rather delay, it still isn't possible to make it to 5 stuns. With some character mindscapes or Wenjin dupes, it's doable, but at a full M0P1 team, and in this case having the stunner with an A-rank weapon, it isn't happening. Not with any sort of consistency at least, and I'd rather not have more miasma priests in this game. Without an extra stun, going into the second stun without resources for a full burst means less total damage. If you happen to run a team without Lucia, rushing into it also means no ether veil for Yidhari. We'll touch on this later, but it's pretty darn bad. So conceptually, it's pretty simple. Build enough wavering stacks, and make sure to have enough decibels and adrenaline on Yidhari before going into stuns. If there's room for it, an out-of-stun enhanced DX special helps. Always open stuns with Lycaon's dodge counter or defensive assist. That way, his stun damage multiplier bonus is applied and wavering has enough time to last for the whole stun. If not using Lycaon, then any other stun or support dodge counter or assist follow-up will do, although a priority should be given to whoever has the shortest animation. Maximize damage within these constraints, alongside managing your days to get 4 stuns, and the kill is within sight. With that in mind, let's go through the run in full and explain how it works. Just a Lycaon one, but the concepts apply to almost every team combination. The start is pretty simple. Position Lucia at the back of the stage and look slightly to the right of the first angled face of the octagon. After doing 3 hits of Lucia's basic attack string, turn around so that the 4th points to the center. That should be just enough distance to start the fight, which means an instant Dream State activation from her basic 5. With Ether Veil activated, the faster charge speed means that Yidhari can often just about get a full charge into a basic 3. And this is important, as she can't dodge out of attacks while charging. Why is it important? Well, remember the game's advanced tutorial on assist counters? The one where you do a dodge counter and a defensive assist at the same time? It turns out that doing this consistently is a really big deal for the fight, so if you haven't been practicing this, get to it. Wavering stacks are built by both assist follow-ups and dodge counters, so by making use of this deck, we can get 2 stacks off of 1 enemy attack. The goal is to build 5 wavering stacks as soon as possible. Getting the triple parable string is really helpful, but far from necessary, as there are multiple attacks that allow for easy stack building. For example, a non-parable barrage of crystals, which we can double dodge with 1 character and get another dodge counter from a red flash at the end. In fact, getting a non-parable attack in the opener is good luck, as it gives an opportunity to sneak in a Lucia dodge counter. Normally you wouldn't want to use Lucia's dodge counter while in dream state. Skill upgrades use up dream points and cause it to end earlier. But in our case, that's exactly what we want, as without doing this, it's likely that Lucia's dream state will drop just as stun begins or halfway through it, which can lead to buffs falling off. So having her spend some gauge and cycle faster means we can get a pre-stun refresh and not worry about that. In the meantime, we go back to Yidhari to squeeze in some damage. Since there's 5 wavering stacks now and she's going to be overcapping on adrenaline, it's the perfect opportunity to fit in an out-of-stun enhanced DX special. There's one thing I forgot to mention actually. If we go back a bit, you may have noticed I used Lycaon's EX special. This wasn't for days, mind you, it was for King of the Summit. Fast forward to the present, and that means this attack, and a good chunk of our out-of-stun damage, will benefit from the crit damage buff. With Lucia finally being out of dream state, this is an opportunity to swap to her into an assist follow-up, refreshing wavering stacks and making for a quick transition into another dream state with an EX special right after. That's kind of it for the lead up to the first stun. Now it's just building days and waiting for the right opportunity to get a dodge counter or assist follow-up with Lycaon to start stun. Attacking with Yidhari and then triggering stun just as her attacks hit can help maximize damage, but it's a minor gain and not really needed. When the stun begins, it's the usual combo. With Lycaon, using his EX is very important, not just for King of the Summit, but to refresh his buff in case you haven't been able to get recent defensive assists on him. Try to shoot for stun ending somewhere between a 205 and a 210 on the timer. This should give enough room to get some attacks and, with the assist counter, build multiple wavering stacks ahead of time. This run is actually not quite ideal as we want Wandering Hunter to go into his phase transition as soon as possible. The closer to 2 minutes on the timer, the better, as any delay will make hitting 4 stuns more difficult. So what you actually want to do is use your stun erodement at around 2:03 to interrupt the boss. When they recover from the stagger, the timer will be around 2 minutes or below, so they go into an immediate phase transition, which can help speed things up. If not, then use a stun erodement during the phase transition animation itself, as it cannot be interrupted. Use it here and not in Miasma, as shredding it too quickly can be a problem, which may not afford enough time to max out wavering. Once the Miasma shield is up, do the boss mechanic. I like to parry on Lycaon, then go for an EX to refresh buffs. Lucia should just about have run out of Dream State at this point, so it's a good opportunity to refresh it. Then go into her ultimate to stock another refresh, and unload energy before Miasma breaks. Then go into Yidhari, and rather than parrying, there's enough time to go for an out of stun enhanced DX special to get some more damage in, and parry with others right after. If you can, it'd be better to use it just before the boss goes into the Miasma shield for more damage, but nothing to be precious about. When at 4 stacks or more of wavering, swap to Yidhari and wait for an attack to begin the second stun with Lycaon's dodge counter or assist follow-up. Then it's another standard combo, nothing to write home about. Timer-wise, the goal here is to end stun at around 2:20 on the clock. The lower it is, the harder it gets to push 4 stuns with all resources. Lead up to the 3rd and 4th stuns is a lot stricter. Since Lycaon's on Steam Oven, we want to spread out his EX use to conserve energy, and therefore impact. Yes, it does carry on for 8 seconds after use, but we're not stunning that fast. As we're speeding through a lot faster here than in the previous 2 stuns, it's important to spend as much time as possible on Yidhari to loop her charged basic attacks for Adrenaline build. It's also important to help daze, as it's very likely that assist points are going to run out long before stun, so make use of as many assist counters as you can to build wavering and daze. Starting the 3rd stun at over 50 seconds on the clock is the target, with maxed out wavering stacks and enough Adrenaline to get 2 enhanced EX specials on Yidhari. Unlike the previous combos, we do not use Lycaon's EX special mid-stun for King of the Summit. It's going to be required for daze build, and coming out of stun with more energy on Lycaon is kind of a big deal for Steam Oven. On the lead up to the 4th stun, just rush through it. Assist points are going to be low, but since Lucia's Dream State tends to run out here, using her ultimate can cover both phases. Just be careful as it interrupts the boss, so it's better reserved to after a dodge counter or assist follow-up. With proper use of assist counters, it is possible to hit 5 stacks of wavering, but don't bother if it means losing out on a 4th stun. As Lycaon's ultimate is on the table and is decently fast, using it after a dodge counter or assist follow-up can build a lot of days while still ensuring wavering uptime for most of stun. Try to go into it with at least 15 seconds left on the timer. As with stun recalcs factored in, that's about how long it takes to do a full combo. If you've maintained wavering uptime in your bursts and got a full combo every stun, then even at 35 substats on Yidhari, it's more than enough for a kill. It does feel quite vanilla as a fight. Manage your buffs, your resources, and your stuns. No having to restart for a specific attack at a specific time, or being at the mercy of random mechanics. You know, like a certain boss that spontaneously blocks, or another whose stun duration is determined entirely by chance. It can get annoying at times as the boss is quite buggy, and I've lost count on how many runs died because the boss just does nothing. But it's consistent enough to the point getting kills with these characters and builds really wasn't all that hard. Other characters can perform too, but first let's cover why Lycaon's just such a good pick here. Honestly, Lycaon was one of the last agents I tried, and turns out that he ended up being not one of, but the strongest stunner for Yidhari. They synergize particularly well, especially against Wandering Hunter. Yidhari likes being on field, be it for damage or resources, and Lycaon, who can be quickly swapped in for a defensive assist, EX, or ultimate, supports that easily. His charged basic attacks can be chucked in after most moves for extra days and energy, so he's able to sustain EX specials in most stuns for King of the Summit. And Lycaon proves to be a reliable pick in situations where a burst of days is needed quickly, being just about timed with Qingyi for the single highest days multiplier in an ultimate. Being of the Ice attribute helps too, and not just due to higher days built from weakness matching. The crit damage bonus from more frequent frostbites actually provides a tangible increase in damage, which isn't something that can be said of Burn, Shock, or Corruption for other Attacker and Rapture agents. His buffs aren't saturated by Yidhari or Lucia, and although Pinnacle does conflict with his stun damage multiplier, the buff won't be around forever, and even with it, he provides the most consistent increases in damage. There is one limitation, which is that Lycaon has to hit enemies and stun for his stun damage multiplier increase to apply, but Yidhari is more than content for it to be this way, as she opens her combo with a chain attack. Then there's how Lycaon has an incredibly fast dodge counter and assist follow-up, making him one of the few stunners that allows for full uptime of wavering regardless of which is used to initiate stuns. For a standard banner unit that everyone is able to get via the guaranteed selector, one who outperforms limited agents using their signature vengeance by using a craftable A-rank alternative, there isn't much of an excuse not to use him. If you do happen to have Blazing Laurel, Lighter Signature, then his value skyrockets even further, making Kyosa's rotation laughably easy. His Mindscapes are great too, M1 providing even more days on EX, leading to a lot more leniency in stun cycles, and M2 giving him even more energy to work with. It almost feels redundant to go through other agents, but we might as well. I should point out that their runs did happen before my Lycaon attempts, so routing is not as optimized, and you catch me doing a few oopsies, like manually charging after Yidhari's enhanced EX special, even though there's no need to, as it inherit the charge anyways. Either way, they're still decent runs and a good measure for evaluating performance, so let's have a look at what Trigger can do. I was genuinely surprised at how well Trigger performed. Being able to use Blazing Laurel means that she packs a strong power budget without needing to use her own signature engine, and even without her additional ability or element weakness match, she still has enough days application to hit 4 stuns. It's a little scary to think how strong she could have been had her passive been updated to work with Rapture agents. Keep in mind that in this setup, Trigger has no Death Shred. For a stunner whose personal damage contribution is no small part of her value add, having to deal with an enemy that has overly inflated defense really hurts. Even then, she can still score competitively. As Trigger is an inactive stunner, that affords Yidhari plenty of time to stay on field to both deal damage and build adrenaline. Her dodge counter is fast and builds a lot of days, and she has the highest assist follow-up days multiplier out of any stun agent. Unfortunately, that comes with a cost, being a painfully slow cast. Even with Lucia's defensive assist and assist follow-up, Trigger's starter shots, and Yidhari's charge basic attack, it still isn't enough to build even 10% days on Wandering Hunter. This may have been different had Trigger's additional ability been active, but the lack of days on her basics means starter shots really suffer in this regard. Meanwhile, a single Trigger defensive assist, not including the assist follow-up, is 7% on the same move. Add in the assist follow-up and it's 16 to 17% days, so it needs to be used often to sustain days build. And the problem comes that it's also what will likely be used to initiate stuns. Lucia's assist follow-up is faster, but not by much, and its lackluster days in comparison to Trigger's means it might leave you at risk of not hitting stun with it. And you don't want Trigger starter shot starting stun, as that wouldn't give a chain prompt. So it's safer to just open with Trigger's assist follow-up. Except that doing so means that wavering will not last for the entire stun duration. It's guaranteed to fall off right before Yidhari's second enhanced TX special lands its backloaded damage. The solution then is to open with Trigger's dodge counters, but this can be difficult to set up. Given how much days Trigger's defensive assists and assist follow-ups do, you may end up starting stun by accident, with anything above 80 days on the bar putting you at risk. Spend too long fishing for the perfect setup though, and then you won't have time to get to all 4 stuns. Trigger stays is good, but not to the point you don't have to worry about thresholds. So there's a fine balancing act between days and buff management that's hard to do well with. She ends up being a character that's easy to pick up, but incredibly hard to master. I would say she's tied for the second best stunner for Yidhari, and I'm pretty certain she should be able to kill with the right stats and good patterns. I say tied because there's another competitor that can at least match Trigger in performance. Fufu. Fufu did fine, and I do believe she's tied for second place as a stunner for Yidhari, but in my opinion, ranks number 1 in most obnoxious to play with. I think on a good run she should outperform Trigger, but you aren't going to see that often, and most certainly not from me, because Fufu is by far the least consistent out of all the stunners I tried. After a few attempts, I frankly just gave up. Couldn't be asked. I say few, but I mean many. Many runs that got nowhere near the end. Fufu is a bundle of anti-synergy with Yidhari. First things first, the unique benefit that Fufu has is that she allows characters to not overcap in decibels. This is an even bigger deal than her refund, as it makes routing a lot easier with very few moments of wasted generation. But since Yidhari's ultimate gets pocketed, well, the extra decibel cap doesn't really do much now, does it? The decibel refund would be nice, and in fact, it allows for some pretty crazy routing. If you can generate enough decibels within the 30-second window for Yidhari's ultimate, it's entirely possible to get 2 uses of ultimate in one stun, which seems like it'd be a huge damage gain. Unfortunately, that isn't actually all that good in practice, as it often means having to sacrifice use of one of her enhanced DX specials to fit everything in, sometimes a chain and an enhanced DX special. If you sacrifice the EX, you still get a 1000% gain in stun, which is decent. If you sacrifice the chain as well though, then that's a net negative. But why sacrifice the chain? Remember how if you generate another 3000 decibels before you've used a stocked ultimate, then you lose it? If you misjudge the decibels by even a little bit, since chain attacks are one of the moves that activates the ultimate buff, you're at a high risk of overlapping and losing it all. Yidhari only stocking ultimate after certain moves is a problem beyond that too, as you need to use these attacks to activate the ultimate buff quickly. If you don't, then no matter how often you hit the enemy, you aren't getting that ultimate. It is still possible to do a full rotation with double chains and to enhance the X specials and still get 2 ultimates. That'd be a massive 3000% damage multiplier gain. But lining up decibels so perfectly to achieve that is very difficult. 1 decibel short levels of difficult. Heck, even if you do manage to execute it correctly, it has even steeper requirements after, as you may end up going into the next stun without enough decibels for an ultimate. Assuming that you do build it all in time, it will be just about. So in practice, it's a pain to do for a rather limited gain. In fact, what will most likely happen is that Fufu's decibel refunds offset rotations. Since Yidhari is gaining decibels faster, if you happen to stock her ultimate before Wandering Hunter has gone into Miasma Shield, chances are you'll lose the ultimate just as stun begins. And trust me when I say it's likely, because it happened again and again. You'll notice in my run that I actively avoid using charged basic attacks on Yidhari until Wandering Hunter has gone into Miasma Shield. That's why. Rather than gamble for a double ultimate that will likely never happen, it's better to just play Fufu like any of the other stunners. At the very least, you get 1 extra out-of-stun ultimate that way. The most infuriating part of this character though is that Fufu will stun the enemy regardless of whether you want to or not. You just about set up for the perfect combo, eagerly awaiting an attack to build your last wavering stack, and yeah, Fufu can be a little too eager at times. This is also something that happened again and again and again and again. Then there's the fact her assist follow-up is also really long, so as with Trigger, wavering stacks fall off before the end. Or how normally getting assist points is good since that means more defensive assists, but because hers and Lucia's assist follow-ups take so darn long, you want to initiate stuns with dodge counters instead. You never be wanting for assist points, as Fufu's chains are constantly restoring them, so that means it's much harder to get dodge counter openers. You need to on-field Fufu or get lucky with an unparable pattern used by the boss. That is, of course, unless it gets interrupted. So I tried, and then I gave up. I like Fufu, I really do. Routing with her is usually very comfy, and she enables crazy double ultimate combos with each one, but man, she is not the pick for Yidhari. It's kind of ironic that the 2 main bosses Fufu is meant to be used against, Miasma Priest and Wandering Hunter, are both bosses that she underperforms in comparison to other stunners. Although there is one benefit, which is that for once, Fufu had the best days application out of all stunners. No more bending over backwards to just barely manage 4 stuns on Miasma Priest. Having a fire weak boss was just what she needed to shine through. I would almost always stun way faster than what I was actually shooting for. If anything, that's part of the reason building back decibels after a double ultimate combo is so hard. Too often I'd be lacking in the resources I needed on Yidhari for a full combo, and going into stuns without full wavering stacks was common. So in that regard, she's the most lenient character for a more casual player that's struggling to manage Miasma Shield timings and days. And for the very skilled players, she's still quite powerful. If a full double ultimate combo can be set up without having decibel build issues later on, then her value skyrockets. There's one more character that I tested somewhat thoroughly who was the worst of the lot, but undoubtedly very fun to play around with. Koleda. There isn't much to say about Koleda other than that she does a lot of days. She's a bit like Lycaon in how she plays, having a quick swappy approach to the fight, with good days values across the board that make it easy to just swap to her for a quick burst and then get right back on Yidhari. In fact, the problem I had with her wasn't getting 4 stuns, it was getting it too quickly, where I'd often go into it without having built enough resources on Yidhari to actually do full combos. Since Yidhari is always double chaining, Koleda's additional ability actually helps out a little bit. Given it's only for chain attacks and is saturated by Yidhari's core passive, it isn't all that significant, but 70% extra damage bonus is still a nice to have. Koleda also only consumes 1 assist point per parry. Normally this wouldn't be all that great given how most stunners so far have very slow assist follow-ups, but hers is decently fast and won't cause an early drop of wavering. Most often you won't even have the opportunity to use it anyways, as even with a 1 assist point cost, it's likely that at least 3 out of the 4 stuns will have you run out of them. It's in large part what makes getting into stuns with her so comfortable. At M0 she's nothing to write home about, especially when Lycaon is of the same rank as her but significantly better in every way. At M2 however, things get really stupid, where it becomes possible to sometimes get 5 stuns on Wandering Hunter while still maintaining high wavering stacks. Although her scores aren't coming close to Lycaon's, she's at the very least really fun to play. These 4 stunners were the ones I properly experimented with, and to be fair, the only options I'd recommend. Other stunners, and sadly, any support other than Lucia, did not feel very good to use, so I didn't really bother much with them. Pulchra, conceptually, sounds good. She allows Yidhari to on-field, and even with Pinnacle, a lot of score is built to sustain damage in the out-of-stun period. Then you actually try her out, and it's terrible. Yidhari's special, Surging Cold Crushing Pursuit, is not a finisher, so it doesn't actually trigger Pulchra's aftershocks, which means she's constantly sitting outside of Hunter's Gate state. Yidhari is almost always going to be at or above 60 adrenaline, so the only time Pulchra does anything is after Yidhari's EX special. On all other stunners, this is only twice in a fight, once before the first stun and then again before the second, usually in Miasma. Except that Pulchra's days build is so terrible that there's enough time for Yidhari to use multiple out-of-stun enhanced EX specials before stuns. And I do mean it when I say it's terrible, because I often found myself dropping Yidhari's ultimate before the very first chain attack had even finished. I'd have Decibels built, an ultimate stocked, and then take more than 30 seconds to get the stun. Technically, you can make use of Lucia's special to trigger Pulchra's aftershocks, and that does help with days, but it leads to offset dream states due to skill upgrades, which is a pain to work with. And even if that means you get things to line up for the first stun, it's still likely to fall off on the second and third stuns. I don't mention the fourth not because it lines up for it, but because Pulchra's days build is so awful that Yidhari is barely making it to 3 stuns as is. Then there's how, because the EX special quick assist to Yidhari, she can only use it after Yidhari's enhanced EX special lands in full, so that means missing on King of the Summit buffs for most of the early stun burst. Look, I can go on, but Pulchra just did not feel good to play. With Lycaon being so easily accessible and far superior than even an M6 Pulchra, there's no reason to use her. The other Sons of Kaladin option is Lyta, who is also, in theory, a strong buffer when paired with Orphie to activate his additional ability. In previous tests with Manitou, I was getting decent results of Lyta and Orphie, but that was on Miasma Priest and the Defiler, both of which have 40% ice resistance. Yidhari isn't going to be used against them, that's for sure. And on Wandering Hunter, they don't do all that well. Orphie's Shred from her additional ability and signature Wenjin does help, but it isn't enough to make her a competitive damage dealer in the fight, not with a 66% increase in base defense. Even if it were workable, remember that Yidhari is already getting a 100% in damage bonus from her core passive. Lattice bonuses are still very strong, mind you, but they do get a little saturated. Stats aside, it also just doesn't feel all that good to play. Maintaining Orphie zeroed in on non-aftershock agents is a pain as is, but it's made worse by the fact that it's difficult to work into combo rotations. Since she quick assists, she suffers from the same issue as Pulchra, as making use of it while Yidhari does her enhanced EX special messes up the combo flow. Which means that you end up just having Orphie set before Lyta in the team order and give up on Yidhari quick assists altogether. It doesn't even hold its weight against a Lycaon and Pan team, which is way more accessible. But even then, not having Lucia in the team is a big problem, and not just in terms of stats. On the topic of Pan, he's okay. At first glance, it seems like he'd do great, and on the surface, he's stronger for Yidhari than for other Rapture agents. Since Yidhari is able to deploy Ether Wellspring herself, she isn't reliant on Lucia for its 5% combat HP bonus and activating conditional buff criteria, like Pinnacle. So the difference between Lucia and Pan should be smaller for Yidhari than for Ishuan or Manitou, but there's a reason I said not having Lucia isn't a stats issue. Yidhari cannot maintain 100% uptime of Ether Veil without Lucia or Mindscapes. This matters because Unlike other Rapture agents, Yidhari really likes Ether Veil. Remember that without it, she doesn't get upgraded chain attacks. She won't get the EX Special Tentacle summons damage and the Yunqui Tail sustain that they provide. And it also slows down the charge speed of her basics. It is possible to route in such a way that Yidhari has Ether Veil up for stuns, but just about. Either it's coming up just as it starts or falling off just as it ends, and having it aligned for the final stun where you're rushing through can be really difficult. In practice, the raw damage percent loss from not having Ether Veil is not that great, especially if it's only in the out of stun period. But it does mean that you may be missing out on the 4-piece effect from Yunqui Tails when stun begins. The slower charge time also seems minor, but it's felt in practice, making charge thresholds tighter and leading to fewer assist counter opportunities. Not to mention the awkward setups that you need to perform to make use of both Pan's buff and Astral Voice, leading to EX on him, then quick assist to Yidhari, then get a dodge counter or assist follow-up very shortly after for wavering. But this is really hard to do effectively, as all of Pan's touch of death hits count as finishes, which leads to Fufu-esque moments where the boss gets stunned when you don't intend it to, ending your run. That is a problem of my own making, as this isn't needed if running Proto-Punk. Pan's buffs and debuffs have long enough duration, but even that isn't all that reliable outside of Fufu teams. Being a defender, Pan only uses up 1 assist point per parry, which means it's easier to have one in stock just before a stun begins, but like with Koleda, assist points tend to run out quickly on Wandering Hunter, so routing can feel awkward as you need to be more particular with daze management and avoid swapping for parries to pocket points instead. With no Lucia though, Astra and Pan are the only decent support options, and Pan is going to be a lot more accessible for most, so even if he's not ideal, he's as good a fallback as you can get. The healing from his ultimate is not half bad either, and helps provide additional decibels through HP consumption, which assists in getting faster refreshes of Ether Veil. And if you have Caesar's signature Wenjin at least, the team-wide daze boost is especially good for Wandering Hunter, making Pan a competitive option. In fact, it's such a big help that you might find the team stunning too quickly, so keep that in mind. On the topic of Astra, she's actually even worse than Pan. Her buffs are comparable to Pan's, but with the added benefit that she can use Moonlight Lullaby or even just Astral Voice and have constant uptime. On the flip side, most support Wenjins aren't all that great for Rapture agents, and she can't make use of Game Ball against Wandering Hunter. But rather than talking stats, we should talk gameplay. Her free chain attacks after ultimate doesn't help Yidhari much, as stun combos are already tight as is, with little room to squeeze in additional chains. It's mandatory to play manual chain with her, as you will rarely be able to swap to your stunner for a King of the Summit refresh without a quick assist getting in the way. It doesn't help that precise assists take priority over red flashes. It's okay for defensive assists, but if you try to swap to another unit on a red flash for a dodge counter, you only get a quick assist instead. No wavering stacks to be had. This is a pain, because you go into stun wanting to refresh stacks of wavering, but the game doesn't let you because you get a quick assist instead of a dodge counter, messing up your buff uptime. Yidhari is also frequently unable to dodge as a result of her charging, so no assist counter to help here. And Astra's notoriously bad daze build is worse than both Lucia's and Pan's, so it's really hard to push all 4 stuns before the timer runs out. Getting the triple parable attack on Wandering Hunter is usually good luck, but Astra doesn't fit in there, so you're limited to only 2 parries, which makes getting enough daze for 4 stuns even harder. And there's the same issues as with Pan, where you're unlikely to get enough decibels on Yidhari to open all stuns with Ether Veil, especially the last. And then you add in another layer of micromanagement. With Yidhari frequently being on field, actually sustaining full uptime of Astra's buff isn't easy. Your stunner's the one that will be getting most of the quick assists. I really tried funky ways to play around with the comp, like making use of her ultimate chain attack on stunner in combos. This would refresh King of the Summit and help conserve energy that is better spent on daze build. But it turns out that her ultimate interrupts bosses even with Miasma shield up, which means you can't gimmick it with an ultimate into defensive assist opener, which leaves you to open stun with ultimate. And if you're using Lycaon, that means you lose out on his stun damage multiplier bonus early on. Honestly, Astra just felt bad. Normally she'd be about even with Pan in terms of performance to Rapture agents, but this time it's no contest. If you don't have Lucia, just use Pan and leave Astra on an attacker team where she belongs. She just doesn't have the right synergy for Yidhari on Wandering Hunter. The last relevant teammate worth covering is Qingyi, but she's also an awkward one to play well with. Yidhari wants to build resources and stay on field, and so does Qingyi. No quick swapping like with Lycaon or Koleda here. With each one, this isn't really that much of a problem. It's possible to build enough gauge on Qingyi for 2 enhanced basic attacks and still have technique points on each one. The issue is that for Wandering Hunter, you don't just need 2 enhanced basic attacks. You need that and enough time to open stun with an assist follow-up or dodge counter. So you better pray that he doesn't just stand around. You need an attack to parry halfway through its cast, else you're not getting that wavering refresh. But even if you manage it, Qingyi's daze build is too good if you're on fielding her for gauge. So stuns either come too quick, and Yidhari doesn't have enough active time to build resources, or you get resources but struggle to get 2 enhanced basic attack casts on Qingyi. It's not all bad, since she always applies 10 stacks on perfect dodging with her enhanced basic, making use of that property to spend less time on her does help. And since she's going to be using EX special mid-stun for King of the Summit refreshes, it builds some extra gauge. Sometimes, like after the second stun, she's going to be coming out of it with a full gauge. You'd think that with her ridiculously fast stun times, and the fact she's only consuming 1 assist point on parries, that Qingyi's greatest strength would be an easy 4 stuns, but it's actually very difficult. There just isn't time to build Yidhari's resources, wavering stacks, and get 2 of Qingyi's enhanced basic attacks out consistently every stun. This pushes back stuns little by little, so when it's time to rush for the 4th, it's already too late. Although admittedly, it's not like I tried all that hard. The character just felt too awkward to push scores on, especially when the other stunners were so much better. Pinnacle saturation of stun damage percent isn't helping Qingyi, so she's sure to perform better once it rotates out, but why keep yourself playing any stunner that isn't Lycaon? All in all, Yidhari is actually pretty darn strong, and surprisingly accessible. With so many characters as best teams often needing a full lineup of premium units, or with their signatures to perform, Yidhari is a breath of fresh air. As much as I might harp on about how important Lucia can be, she is still self-sufficient, and can bring about solid numbers even at low levels of investment. The Ishuan, Lucia miasma priest skills with Pinnacle are packing at least a full set of limited agents, be it Fufu or Qingyi. So being able to consistently hit 65,000 score on Wandering Hunter with a Steam Oven M0 Lycaon feels great. This ended up being quite long. It was meant to just be a bit of a Deadly Assault run breakdown, but turned out to be a team guide instead. I suppose that's what happens when we get a hammer character. Eagerly awaiting the release of a Greatsword and Heavy Bowgun agent so I can nerd out on them too. Oh, and Gun Lance as well. As mentioned before, there's still a full guide coming, as there's lots of little things about Yidhari that I didn't cover here, or covered only briefly. So if you want to be notified for when that drops, or you're just interested in niche tech and breakdowns of fundamental game mechanics, then do like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. I've got more videos coming. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.